Every form of life on our planet depends on two things: heat and water. The presence of heat is essential for life to develop, but alone it is not enough. Without water, without moisture, the surface of the earth would be a lifeless desert. For a seed to germinate, we know it needs soil and generous watering. And yet we cannot help noticing that sometimes nothing at all is born from a seed, and we wonder why. It is not an easy question to answer. To do so, we will have to look into the mysterious factors which, like the works of an immense clock, measure out the complex timing of life, the cycles of the seasons, the rhythms of living creatures. Those same mechanisms also control the most important rhythms affecting our bodies, especially in the woman's reproductive cycle. Every woman carries inside her a kind of internal clock which regulates a vital function, that of procreating, of giving life to a child. Let us think of a woman's body as if it were the soil in which we would like to plant seed. The soil needs rain and moisture to be fertile. Something similar is true of a woman's body during the fertile phase of her monthly cycle, when she is aware of the presence of moisture.
She feels the sensation of wetness and sees the appearance of mucus after a time of dryness outside the vagina as she goes about her daily work. Every woman during her fertile years can be easily taught to recognize this sensation and identify her fertile phase when this mucus secretion is present in her body. At first, the mucus looks cloudy and sticky. Then it becomes progressively clearer and more elastic, with a wet, slippery sensation. This, then, is the moisture we have been talking about.
Let us go back to the clock that accompanied our first encounter with this subject. As a starting point, we will take the most evident and familiar event, menstruation, and mark it in red. After menstruation, there is usually a time of dryness or drought. We will mark it in brown, like the dry soil. Then comes the first indication of the moist time, in the form of a particular type of mucus, as we have already seen. We will mark this phase in white. Another time of dryness follows, once again colored brown. This dry time lasts until the beginning of the next menstruation. We will mark this with red, and the cycle begins again. One glance is enough to see the part of the cycle when the seed can germinate and eventually bear fruit. Obviously, not here, or here when the ground is dry, as arid as the desert. It is much more likely to germinate here, when moisture is present, when there is mucus in the woman's body.
But the clock is not identical for all women, and not even for one woman. It can change over the years. So let us take a very careful look at this vital mechanism. We open up the workings of the clock and spread them out. Let us divide this strip up into a series of boxes, one for each day of the month. The 30 boxes correspond to a cycle of 30 days. We will use this standard cycle as a basis for understanding shorter or longer cycles. Let us begin by marking the days of menstruation: 1, 2, 3, perhaps 4, 5. Now the dry time begins. We will note these days on our chart. Next, we have the start of the moist time, when it is possible for a seed to germinate. This is when women become potentially fertile. The first day, the mucus is sticky, dense, not elastic, and it may be a slightly creamy color. It is not necessary to touch the vaginal area with the fingers to notice this difference. The pictures are only examples of how the mucus appears. As the days go by, it becomes more clear, elastic, and transparent. Accompanied by a wet, slippery sensation and a strong feeling of lubrication. Then a change takes place and the mucus becomes cloudy, sticky in appearance, and the sensation of wetness and lubrication disappears altogether. This indicates that the last day in which the mucus was still clear, slippery, and lubricative was the peak day.
We mark it in a special way to distinguish it from all others, because this is an important day by the clock which measures out a woman's life. The one day when she possesses her maximum degree of fertility and she is most likely to become pregnant. Remember, the peak day can be identified by the woman only the following day when the mucus has changed appearance or may have disappeared altogether. Let us leave the 3 days following the peak day attached to it, to show that they too are fertile days, even though gradually less so, as we will see later. The 4th day after the peak day marks the beginning of infertile time. During this time, without moisture, a woman cannot conceive. Let us follow the remaining days of the cycle on the chart until the start of the next cycle. The length of time between the peak day and the start of menstruation is relatively constant, about 2 weeks. What makes a cycle longer or shorter is only the number of days between menstruation and the arrival of the peak day. The dry days before the mucus begins may be completely absent, or they may go on for longer than usual, even for weeks.
A woman never knows in advance how long her cycle will last, but to get to know the clock regulating her fertility does not call for any calculation. All she has to do is to observe herself every day to see whether the mucus has made its appearance and how it behaves.
Independent of regularity or lack of regularity of her cycle, or the special situation she may be in, such as breastfeeding or when she is nearing the change of life, the presence and behavior of mucus informs her of the state of her fertility. It is as simple as that.
This is the clock which marks a woman's fertility. Once you understand it, you will realize how reliable and precise it can be. Make good use of it.
Let us imagine 2 houses. In each of them lives a happily married young couple. Let us meet the first couple. They are very much in love, and their conjugal relationship is good. As a result, they have a child. Fine. And another child arrives. Then another. Then a 4th. And a 5th. Marital relations are not only for procreation. They express and increase the love between the husband and wife. However, if children come too close together, it may be harmful to the health of the mother and of the children. Moreover, if the family is poor, frequent childbirth may become a financial burden, and the mother may not be able to give enough time to each child. This is why spacing your children is important for the family. And what about the other couple? They too love one another and express their love physically. But although they want them, they do not yet have children. Why is that? There may be many possible answers to that question, because there could be many causes. Perhaps they made love on days without moisture, without the mucus. These, or else these. But why is the presence of the mucus so important for regulating fertility? What lies behind this sign? To answer this question, let us try to see how a woman's reproductive system works.
These are the ovaries, the organs that produce the ovum or egg, which may be fertilized by the male seed. Here is the vagina, the cervix or neck of the womb, and the uterus or the womb. Inside the uterus is a mucous membrane that lines the wall, known as the endometrium. This lining forms at the beginning of each new cycle to provide a kind of bed on which the fertilized ovum can come to rest and implant in order to develop and grow. But if the ovum is not fertilized at the end of the cycle, this bed will be expelled and will disappear with menstruation, making way for a new one. These channels are known as the fallopian tubes, or simply tubes, and they lead to the ovaries. In the ovary, the ovum grows surrounded by a crown of cells. This is called the follicle. The brain tells the follicle to begin its maturing process, at the height of which it opens up to release the ovum at ovulation. And a signal is sent to the cervix ordering it to start producing the mucus, which causes the wet sensation. If the follicle has speeded up the process and the signal for the mucus has already been sent to the cervix, then that will eliminate the dry time following the end of menstruation. This explains why a cycle may be short. If, on the other hand, the follicle delays the beginning of the maturing process, then the signal will be sent later, and a long cycle will be the result.
Let us go back with our chart to an average cycle, marking the white boxes of the mucus until the peak day. When the mucus is as fluid as this, or the woman still feels lubricated even after the stretchy mucus has vanished, it is a signal that the follicle is about to release the ovum from the ovary. Around this time, in fact, the ovum is released and enters the tube. The ovum is now on a direct road to the uterus and the vagina. As it travels through the tube, here it may encounter the husband's seed if there has been an act of intercourse between the husband and the wife. The time during which the ovum can be fertilized is very short. If it does not meet with a male seed during this time, it will disintegrate in a few hours. After the peak day, the mucus quickly thickens, as we know, but now we learn that in doing so, it forms a kind of plug at the entrance to the uterus, sealing it off completely. This happens in any case, whether or not the ovum has been fertilized. It is an automatic occurrence. In the event of fertilization, the plug will serve as a defense against germs. And so, when we said that during the whole of this time marked in brown, a woman cannot be fertilized, it is because the ovum has already disintegrated and the male seed is prevented by this plug from entering the uterus. This brings us to the end of the cycle with the appearance of the new menstruation and the removal of the plug. The inner lining of the uterus, which had been formed to receive the fertilized ovum is now dismantled and is carried away with bleeding.
That is why it would be more correct to think of menstruation as the end of the cycle, but just as menstruation begins, a new cycle commences. Nature prepares a new bed inside the uterus. And with the appearance of the first mucus comes the signal that in the ovary the follicle is maturing with the ovum inside of it. And when the peak day arrives, we know the ovum is about to be released and that it will enter the tube. Now the ovum can be reached by the male seed, which has made its way up from the vagina. The male semen contains millions of sperm. The fluid mucus filters out abnormal sperm and enables the healthy ones to enter the cervix with great ease, as if swimming up a river. This favorable mucus also nourishes the sperm, so they will be full of energy and vitality when they reach the ovum in the tube. In addition, the mucus keeps alive and healthy for 2 or 3 days, sometimes a little longer, those which had entered the cervical crypts, or storerooms, as we will explain later.
Now, let us follow the ones that have gone straight up to the uterus, making their way up the tubes. They cannot know whether the ovum is to the right or the left, so the sperm go in both tubes. This is the moment of the meeting of a sperm and an ovum. Of the millions of sperm which have entered the vagina, only a few hundred can pass through the mucus. And only one penetrates the ovum and fertilizes it, so that a new life begins.
The hereditary characteristics of the parents mingle and will be passed on to their child. As of this moment, the individual's unique genetic makeup is determined. Meanwhile, at the cervix, the plug is being formed, the defense. The fertilized ovum now comes down the tube, this time not to disintegrate, but to reach the endometrial lining, the bed that has been prepared to receive it. At the start of labor, the plug drops out. It has served its purpose. And then,
consider again the indispensable role in the process played by the mucus. When it is dense and sticky, enlargement shows it to be an intricate network so closely knit that it forms an impenetrable barrier even against the microscopic sperm or seed of the husband. As the time of ovulation approaches, the water content increases, and the mesh begins to open to allow the sperm to go through. As the peak day approaches, the mucus forms channels to permit the passage of the sperm. Some remain for a time in the cervix, waiting for the right time to race up to fertilize the ovum. The sperm sheltered in cervical crypts are still alive because the mucus has protected and nourished them. Some will certainly reach the end of the tube at the right moment, when the ovum is there ready at last to be fertilized. This explains why, in the presence of favorable mucus, which helps the sperm to stay alive, a physical union or intimate genital contacts between the husband and wife, even a few days before the release of the ovum, can result in conception.
this confirms the importance of mucus as a signal informing a woman of her potential fertility. But what about the 3 days marked as potentially fertile after the peak day? Ovulation usually occurs 1 day after, or sometimes even 2 days after, the peak day of the mucus. The released ovum lives about 1 day.
After ovulation, the mucus thickens and begins to form the plug. Until the barrier provided by the mucus has become impenetrable, it is possible for some sperm to make their way up the tube to the ovum, when it is still able to be fertilized. One last thing we have to consider is the mechanism which controls much of the functioning of our clock in the brain. In fact, there is a gland in the brain, the pituitary, that sends out the signal to commence the maturing of the follicle. This sets off the whole process leading to ovulation. It is this process which provides the signal for mucus to be produced. It may happen if a woman is tired or affected by the stress of work, anxiety, family problems, that the brain will not send the signal to the ovaries. It is as though nature recognized that this would be the wrong time for the added responsibility of a child. In such circumstances, a woman's cycle may be long and irregular. During breastfeeding, the brain may suspend temporarily the ovaries' activities in order to protect the body's ability to provide nourishment to the baby. Breastfeeding is a natural and ideal way of feeding the baby. It helps the baby develop better biologically and emotionally. It also prevents infections, as all the protection from the mother is passed on to the baby through the mother's milk.
In the event of longer cycles, and especially during breastfeeding, a woman should learn to recognize her own basic infertile pattern, which denotes inactivity of the ovaries. This will either be a sensation of constant dryness or an unchanging discharge day after day for at least 2 weeks. This type of discharge is quite different from the mucus seen when a woman is ovulating normally, and so we will mark it on the chart with a different color, yellow. But when will the ovulatory mucus return to tell us the clock has started up again? Apparently, nature prefers to set things in motion gradually, with a series of little spurts and starts in the form of occasional appearance of mucus and changes in sensation outside the vagina. And it is generally only when the baby no longer obtains its nourishment exclusively from the mother's breast that the gland in her brain starts the mechanism up again, sending a signal to the ovaries to resume the maturing of the follicles and release of the ovum. Now you have some understanding about a woman's fertility. You possess the knowledge of the way to bring life into the world, or to postpone it for another cycle or another year.
This freedom of choice can be summed up like this. If you want a child, you know that the most favorable moment for conception will be when the mucus secretion is clear and stretchy like raw egg white, accompanied by a sensation of wetness and lubrication. If, on the other hand, you need to space your pregnancies or not get pregnant at all, you must adhere to the following rules. Avoid marital relations on the days of menstrual bleeding. The reason for this is that the brain may start sending the messages early to the ovaries, and the mucus may be masked by blood, making it impossible for the woman to know that her time of fertility has started. Have relations during this dry time only in the evening, and only after carefully making sure the mucus hasn't appeared, together with the sensation of moisture. In order not to be confused by seminal fluid, which might mask the onset of mucus, avoid relations on consecutive evenings. Avoid physical union throughout the mucus time and during the 3 days after the peak day. And to have relations without any possibility of pregnancy, all of this time, day or night, is available.
But when a woman has very long cycles or is breastfeeding, what should the couple do? During this time, which may last weeks or even months, the woman knows that she is not fertile, either because of dryness or because of the persistent presence of an unchanging vaginal discharge. This is different from slippery, clear mucus, which has substance and may stretch. The rule to postpone pregnancy in these circumstances is: the couple may have marital relations only in the evenings, and not on consecutive evenings, in order to be able to recognize more easily the beginning of the fertile phase.
Avoid relations altogether during any appearance of mucus, plus 3 days of abstinence when the pattern of infertility returns. And once you recognize the typical ovulatory mucus pattern building up to the peak day, you can be sure you've gone back to your cycle of fertility. Our friend, the clock. Studies of this method done around the world have shown that if the rules to avoid pregnancy, as we have taught them to you, are followed carefully, very few pregnancies occur. However, if the rules are disregarded and couples have marital relations or intimate genital contacts on days of fertility, many pregnancies will occur.
You can follow this simple method by keeping your own record with this kit that has colored stamps, and stamps showing different types of mucus to be placed on the chart. When you observe that a comparable type of mucus or sensation of lubrication appears to be present in your body.
Instructional posters are also available depicting the possible circumstances of a woman's reproductive life, such as average, short, and long cycles, during breastfeeding, after discontinuing the pill or the removal of an IUD, during illness, medication, and premenopause. In summary, this ovulation method can be very effective if the rules are followed correctly. This is a natural method, and one which does not interfere with your body's natural cycles or your health.
There are no physical side effects because it does not involve the use of chemicals, drugs, or devices.
It can be taught by non-medical persons, is very inexpensive to use, increases understanding of how a woman's body works, and may strengthen communication between husband and wife.
Responsibility for family planning is shared by both partners.
There are no religious or moral objections to its use.
On the other hand, it does require a firm commitment on the part of both the husband and the wife, if it is to work for them, to space or limit pregnancies.
It needs motivation and self-control to accept abstinence during any phase considered by the couple as potentially fertile if a pregnancy must be avoided.
It is a method for a husband and wife who look upon their combined fertility as a gift to be cherished and protected, and days of marital abstinence as an expression of love and maturity.